I didn't even have time to explain. He just stood there staring at me. And I froze because I knew. He knew. The front door slammed shut, the sound slicing through the silence. My head snapped up. There he was. Standing in the doorway. Not moving. Not blinking. His eyes locked on mine with a look I'd never seen before. Cold, sharp, like a blade pressed against my throat. My stomach tightened. Then I saw it. The phone in his hand. His grip was so tight his knuckles had turned white. My breath caught in my chest. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. He wasn't supposed to be standing there, staring at me like I was a stranger. A liar. A fraud. Slowly he stepped forward, every movement deliberate, controlled. My pulse pounded against my ribs. He reached the table, lifted his arm, and with one swift motion, dropped the phone. It clattered against the wood, spinning slightly before settling face up. The screen was still on. I didn't need to look. I already knew what was there. The video. That video. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. Words were forming in my head, excuses, explanations, anything. But before I could even open my lips, his voice cut through the room like a gunshot. How long were you planning to lie to me? I had no answer. Because I knew, whatever I said wouldn't matter anymore. Back then I had no idea my life was about to be ripped apart. I thought I had everything. A stable marriage, a man who loved me, a future I could trust. But now looking back I should have seen the cracks. 2 nights ago he came home late. Said work ran over. Kissed me on the forehead like nothing was wrong. But I felt it, something was different. I shrugged it off, told myself I was imagining things. But then came the message. A single vibration on my phone. Swing by. We need to talk. His best friend. His closest confidant. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. What could he possibly want? I stared at the clock. My husband wouldn't be home for hours. The house was too quiet, my thoughts too loud. Curiosity won. I grabbed my keys, heart pounding for reasons I didn't understand. I didn't know it then, but that single decision, that one moment of hesitation, was the first domino to fall. And once it started, there was no stopping what came next. It was just a moment, or at least that's what I told myself. The conversation had stretched longer than I intended, the air thick with tension I couldn't name. His words looped in my mind, each one chipping away at the reality I thought I knew. I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but you need to see for yourself. He slid his phone across the table. My stomach twisted as I picked it up. The images were grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. My husband. With another woman. Her face was turned away, but the way they stood, the way his hand lingered on her back, it wasn't just a friendly exchange. My pulse roared in my ears. Denial fought logic. Maybe it's not what it looks like. But I wasn't stupid. I felt my chest tighten, the betrayal sinking in fast. And then, suddenly he was closer. His voice was low. You deserve the truth. His hand brushed my arm. His lips found mine. It lasted only seconds before I pushed him away. But the damage was done. The line had been crossed. There was no undoing it. And then I saw his messages, and everything flipped upside down. I walked into the house expecting guilt to eat me alive, but something was off. He was home earlier than usual, moving around the kitchen without looking at me. His shoulders were tense, his jaw locked. He barely said a word, just nodded when I asked about his day. My skin prickled. He was hiding something. I told myself I was paranoid, shaken from what had happened earlier. But then he disappeared into the shower and left his phone behind. He never did that. Ever. My pulse spiked as I stared at it, sitting there on the counter like an invitation. My fingers shook as I picked it up. The screen lit up. One unread message. I swiped. And then I saw it. You need to disappear by Friday. I've taken care of everything. My breath hitched. My hands turned ice cold. My mind raced. Who was he talking to? What needed to be taken care of? My stomach twisted as a horrifying thought crept in. Was this about her? Or about me? I waited. My heart pounded so hard I thought he'd hear it over the sound of the running water. The message burned in my mind, every word twisting deeper into my gut. Disappear. Taken care of. What the hell did that mean? The second he stepped out, steam rolling behind him, I didn't wait. What are you planning behind my back? My voice was sharp, but my hands were trembling. He paused, towel slung low around his waist, droplets of water trailing down his chest. His eyes locked onto mine, unreadable, dark. He didn't answer. My stomach twisted. Who are you texting? Silence. He took a step closer. Then another. My breath hitched. Say something. But he didn't. Instead, his hands found my waist, his grip firm, fingers pressing into my skin. His lips crashed into mine, cutting off every thought in my head. His touch was desperate, like he needed me to forget. And for a second I did. I melted. I let him erase my doubt. Because deep down I already knew he didn't want me to ask. And I didn't want to hear the truth. And then that message came, and I realized everything was far worse than I thought. My phone buzzed, the sharp vibration slicing through the silence. My pulse jumped. Unknown number. My fingers hesitated before swiping to unlock. One sentence. You're living with someone you don't know. My breath caught. My hands turned ice cold. My eyes darted toward the bedroom where he was sleeping, his breath slow, steady, like he had nothing to hide. But I knew better now. My stomach twisted as I stared at the message. Who sent this? How did they know? My heart pounded so hard it felt like my ribs would crack. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't pretend this was fine. I grabbed my keys, adrenaline crashing through me. There was only one person who might have answers. My hands shook as I started the car, my mind racing faster than the engine. I barely registered the road, barely blinked. My husband was lying to me. I just didn't know how much. But someone out there did. And I needed to find out before it was too late. I was chasing the truth, but I never expected to find this. His best friend's face was tight, his jaw locked, like he'd been holding something back for too long. I saw him, he said, voice low, measured. Withdrawing cash. Large amounts. From an account that doesn't exist. My skin prickled. What do you mean it doesn't exist? He exhaled sharply, ran a hand through his hair. It's not in his name. It's not in yours. On paper it's like it was never there at all. My pulse spiked. My husband had a secret account. Secret life. I needed answers. He slid a slip of paper across the table. An address. If you want to know the truth, go there. My hands trembled as I took it. I hesitated, fear twisting inside me. But I couldn't turn back now. I drove in silence, my heart hammering. The apartment door creaked as I stepped inside. My husband's things were here. His scent. His clothes. But then my stomach dropped. Because they weren't alone. There were women's clothes too. And they weren't mine. I thought I had everything under control. But it was all slipping away and I didn't even realize how fast. I came home to an empty house. His shoes weren't by the door. His jacket wasn't hanging in the hallway. He wasn't here, and for a moment I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I didn't have to face him yet, but I also didn't know where he was. I was about to pour myself a drink when the doorbell rang. It was his best friend. We sat in the living room, sipping wine in awkward silence. He kept saying he was always there for me, that he cared more than I knew. I didn't believe him, but I wasn't about to turn him away. And then, as if by some silent agreement, our eyes met. The air between us thickened. I felt it. He did too. It wasn't just pity in his gaze anymore. It was something else. Something dangerous. Before I knew it, I leaned forward, pulled him into a kiss. A mistake? Or something worse? The door creaked behind us and his voice cut through the air like ice. I knew it. I had lost everything, but the worst was yet to come. He threw the phone at me, the screen glaring in my face. My hands shook as I picked it up, my breath caught in my throat. On the screen there it was. A recording from the security camera. There I was, lips pressed against his best friend's. The kiss I thought was a moment of weakness, but it was now immortalized in pixelated clarity. His voice was cold, emotionless. You asked what I was hiding? Now it doesn't matter. I stared at the phone in disbelief, the weight of his words sinking in like lead. He didn't even look at me as he turned to leave, his footsteps heavy against the floor. He didn't need to say another word. He was done. He was leaving. Forever. I wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, to tell him everything, anything, but the words wouldn't come. The door clicked shut behind him and I was alone. But then, just before the silence swallowed me whole, another message popped up on the screen, another secret waiting to be exposed. You're not the only one who's been lying. Thought it was over. I thought after everything the pain would finally stop. I sat there, numb, staring at the empty space where he had been. I had nothing left. No explanations, no chances to make things right. But then my phone buzzed again. Another message, a cruel twist in a game I didn't even know I was playing. You were just a pawn in his game. The words hit me like a slap to the face. I was already broken, but this was worse than anything I could have imagined. I opened my banking app, my fingers trembling. The numbers on the screen didn't make sense at first. It couldn't be real. But there they were, large transfers, accounts I had never seen before, money that shouldn't have existed. All of it was in my name. My husband had set me up. He had used me, played me like a fool. And now, as I sat there, shattered, the realization hit me harder than anything else. He was gone. And I was left to face the consequences. Alone. Everything had crumbled and I had no one to blame but myself.